what most people want in this business when they get started is they want the cash flow. I get cash flow from day one with a master lease. It gives me the opportunity to build up rapport with the owners, gain trust, do a good job, and I get to test drive the property to see if I even have any interest in it before I buy it.
This episode brought to you by Suites at Madison. Meeting and conference rooms for rent by the hour, week, month, or year. Suites at Madison, where business gets done. Check them out at www.downtowntampaoffice.com. Now, on to the show.
You are listening to the Invest Florida Real Estate Show, covering topics in lending, buy and sell strategies, property management, hot markets, and tips and tools to guide you along the way on your path to real estate success. You want Florida investment real estate talk? You have come to the right place. And now, our hosts, Eric Odom and Steven Silverman.
Hello and welcome to an episode of the Invest Florida Real Estate Show. This is your co-host, Eric Odom, along with Steven Silverman. Steven, it's a wonderful day in the neighborhood.
Eric, it certainly is. I mean, we on this show focus on investment, commercial properties and residential. And every now and then, I think we owe you some congratulations. You just did a little deal on a development property, and tell us how that went.
Well, occasionally I'll do some residential. I've done some fix and flips. I've done some just outright flips. And in this particular instance, I bought a piece of something different. I bought a piece of land and subdivided it into two different lots. And, took me a while to kind of work through the process with the city to get the approval. And that's occurred at the end of last year. And then we just went to contract on, one of the two parcels that was split. So this is a small deal, but, it seemed like a good opportunity at the time and, seems to be working out. I've obviously still got to get rid of sell the other property as well. But we're discussing perhaps building on that second lot and then collecting, rent off of it and maybe owning that. But not really sure yet. We're just going to have to kind of play through. I'm going to run through the numbers right now and seeing how we might do that. But anyway, it's, we do our own investment properties. As we talk about, the show today, that there's so many ways to skin the cat. That's one of them. I'm not sure I'll do another development deal. There seems to be, maybe not as fixed in my breadbasket. There's a lot of nervousness of whether the deal was going to work out. And we know these other deals that we seem to, particularly with the residential side, on the multifamily side, or with us on the office side here, we know what we're dealing with, and it's a lot more clarity on a deal and whether it's going to cash flow or not, and whether we're going to come out and on the right side of a transaction.
Well, I know part of the issue you had was with a big tree, so I'm glad you came out of the woods.
Oh God, trees.
We won't go into that.
No, trees, man, trees. Trees in residential areas. It's one of those things that you got to be cautious of. So anyway, we won't get into it any more than that. But Stephen, I had a review here. KJ McQueen says, I've been meaning to write this review for some time now. Beyond the smorgasbord of information you get from the show itself is fun. Stephen and Eric genuinely seem to have a great time during the interviews. They take their time with guests and let them expand on topics in other ways other podcasts don't. They also break down the information knowledge presented in a way that's easy to understand and follow. The only drawback is to listen to them on my walks, and I often don't have a pen handy to take notes when a guest drops a gem. Thanks, guys, and keep them coming. Hey, we really appreciate that, KJ. If you guys haven't done it already, that type of review helps us gain other guests. It's really a big help, not only to us, but to you. So we really appreciate you doing that, KJ. Anybody else who hasn't done it, go on iTunes or on Stitcher or on Google Play and leave us a review. We'll happily read it, except the negative ones.
Just send those to Eric personally.
The negative ones about Steve and I will happily read. But guys, we got a great guest, and I don't want to spend all the time on the intro here, so let's go ahead and roll into our show.
Today we have with us David Tilney. David has been involved in various aspects of real estate for over 40 years. He started buying houses in 1978 and then went into property management. David was a pioneer in buyer brokerage in the residential market. In the 1980s, he was one of the largest buyers of foreclosures in his county. And he then went into doing master leases. In 1996, he converted all his management contracts to master leases, and at one point controlled over 100 master leases and ran a multi-million-dollar note portfolio for investors in Hong Kong. He has a passion for teaching and shares his insight on property management and master leasing with others. David, we're happy to welcome you to the Invest Florida show.
Oh, thanks very much, Stephen.
Hey, David, really appreciate you investing time with us today. Can you tell us a little bit about, like, you're located in Naples, are you not?
I am.
How did you end up in the great state of Florida?
Yeah, that is a good question since, I've always been a kind of a cold weather person, like skiing very much, raised my family in Colorado Springs.
Oh, nice.
When our youngest went off to college, I essentially said to my wife, what do we want to do when we grow up? I said, why don't we go to New Zealand for 2 years and see how bad it hurts? She said, don't be ridiculous. That's too far away. She'd moved 1,800 miles away when she went to college, and I met her out at University of Denver. And she wanted to spend some time with her folks. Her dad had lost an eye to cancer, and they had some health issues, and they were in Florida. So that's what got me here. But now that I've been here for, this is the 18th year, I've really grown to love it. If I had to give up one of two places, I very much give up Colorado Springs, although I have 2 of our daughters and 6 of our grandkids there.
Man, it's beautiful there. Do you still ski?
Not often, because I kind of like the warm weather now, but I did go skiing last year with a daughter, and I took out my regular skis, and they wouldn't fit in the gondola unless I put them at an angle. They were Rossignol Stratos 207s, and I bought them my sophomore year in high school.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, it's like skiing with antiques or playing tennis with a wooden racket, right?
Yeah, it was a little different, I guess. And now I'm a flatlander. So, the lack of oxygen when you go up to 13,000 feet, that really affects me.
Yeah, no, it does me too. I try to make it at least once or twice a year and ski. And the first 3 or 4 days, it's nights, it's just not particularly comfortable waking up every couple of hours and gasping. So, you get used to it down here. There's plenty of oxygen, that's for sure.
Sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into real estate?
Sure. I got out of, I wasn't much of a student. So when I was in college, it was either get out quick or drop out. And so I got out in a little over 3 years, and I needed a job because my wife was still in school. And I got a job working for the JCPenney company. They moved me to Colorado Springs, and one of my fellow workers pushed me, pulled me, dragged me, and got me to buy my first house with them. I came from a background where my dad said the one thing you don't want to do is buy real estate because it's not liquid. Being a little bit of the black sheep, it took a little nudge to get going. But once I'd gotten my taste, then it was hard to hold me back. We bought our first house, I think it was for $28,000 or $28,500, and we took subject to an 8% VA loan and used our credit cards to come up with a down payment. And the rest it just kind of went from there. We took that house, bought it, and then we wrapped the financing and sold it and took a spread. So that's kind of how we started.
Oh, wow.
And then you went into leasing after that. How did you progress from that house? Buying and leasing?
What really happened is we started buying a number of houses, and I tested 3 or 4 different management companies managing my stuff, and none of them had the attention to detail and follow through that we required. I mean, one of the early houses that we bought that was quote unquote professionally managed, I had a conical fireplace stolen out of the house. I had a fire started in the rear bedroom, and I had the back fence burned down. And in every case, I could solve the problem cheaper than the insurance claim, but I realized very quickly that I had to learn how to manage if I was going to be in the business long term. Mm-hmm. Once we took on our properties and were doing self-managing, then there was no reason not to take on other people's properties just to help cover the overhead. So it just kind of developed from an organic situation that we managed ours and then took on some friends, and it grew from there.
Sure, because you'd built up then a whole network of whether they're plumbers and roofers and pavers and all those things where you...
And property managers.
Yeah,
you had full-time people on staff, didn't you, David?
No, I did not.
Okay,
I mean, I always decided less was more. I did have a couple of brokers once upon a time, and I decided I really didn't like that. I had one office manager worked with me for a little over 10 years until she retired at 65. But other than that, we don't have any employees at this point. We do use independent contractors to solve problems, but we have systems in place, and it works very, very well.
Interesting. So how did you get into Master Leasing? Tell us about that.
Well, could you also tell us what Master Leasing is?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Master Leasing is where I might lease a property from Stephen and turn around and sublease it to Eric and take a spread out of the middle. And I'm not working as Stephen's agent. I'm not working as his property manager. I'm a principal. And Stephen's willing to lease his property to me because I offer him something of value to him and it makes economic sense. I'm willing to lease Stephen's property because I can get some value out of that property also. And master leases, I mean, they've been done for years in the commercial real estate business. Just to give you some examples that may make sense, you've got people that will lease a big space in a commercial building and sublease it as executive office space, put some copy machines in it and a conference room and some desks. You also have, in many cases, you've got someone owns some ground. They lease it to a big outfit that builds a hotel on it. The hotel subleases the property to a management company for 10 years at a time, like Sheridan or some other thing. So, I mean, master leasing has been around for forever. I mean, Hong Kong was leased from the PRC, People's Republic of China, by Great Britain for 100 years and subleased to developers who subleased to builders who subleased to owners on 60-year leases and whatever. And, Hawaii, an awful lot of Hawaii is built on land leases that go back to the income goes to the Kamehameha schools. And so it's been something that's been around forever and ever. You just haven't seen it in the residential market. But it really makes a lot of sense. And I think it's much better for owners than using a fee manager per se. And it's certainly better for the master tenant.
So help me understand. I mean, conventional wisdom is you buy a property, you put in a tenant, and you take out a mortgage, and over time the income pays off the mortgage and you own the property free and clear. And with a master lease, you never really own the property. So how does it work better for the investor?
Well, first of all, there's nothing that says that the investor can't end up in ownership in the property. The one thing that people need to realize is your first negotiation is never your last negotiation. It's the first bite out of the property, but it's how to control the property. And you can control properties long-term with master leases. The IRS, for example, says that if you own a property for 30 years or longer, you own it and you can depreciate it. Now, the question is, what's your basis in it? From my standpoint, when I leased properties long-term, I didn't have a basis in it because I didn't pay anything for the lease other than monthly payments. And those monthly payments were fully deductible as my ongoing rental expense in controlling the property. You don't need a lot of capital. There's very little risk, a lot less risk than ownership. Think of people going into the last downturn, 2007 to 2010. Is it easier to get out of a lease or easier to get out of title on a property? You can clearly get out of a lease easier, especially since you get to draft the lease. And that's the next point. You get to draft by design and not by default. When you buy a property, you go to a closing and people shove papers in front of you and you got to sign someone else's paperwork. When you're master leasing something, you get to create the paperwork. So you can be Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. When you're the master tenant, clearly the lease is going to be pro-tenant. When you are now managing the subtenant, your lease is going to be very much pro-landlord. And so there's just tremendous flexibility. It's a great way to get control of a property and test drive it before you even decide whether it makes sense for you to end up in ownership. So it doesn't mean you don't get to own it. You can, but do you have to own it? Can you get the benefits, most of the benefits of real estate without owning it? Clearly you can. I had a 35-year leasehold interest that 10 years into my lease, I was given half the appreciation on the property to remove my lease from the property. So you can control appreciation. You can certainly control cash flow. You don't have to worry about interest rates on mortgages. You can take negative cash flow property and it can be positive cash flow for you. Big ticket items like roof replacements and furnaces don't have to be your cost. All of those things are negotiated items, of course. I can sign a lease where I guarantee to pay the rent, whether it's vacant or full. I can take care of all expenses up to a stop loss. Or I can have a performance lease that says I will pay you a percentage of what I get if and when I get it. If I don't receive anything, I won't pay you anything. There's tremendous flexibility as to what you can do with master leases.
So talk to us about the owner. Why would they want to enter in this type of relationship where they're losing control of their property? There must be some ulterior motives for them. Can you talk a little bit about the motives of the owner, the property owner?
Sure. The first thing I'd ask is, in your town, do property management companies exist?
Sure, of course they exist.
Yeah, so owners have a need or a desire to have other people run their properties. So that's not a conflict there. Uh-huh. But there's, what are some of the benefits over master leasing to them over hiring an agent in an agency relationship to manage for them? One of the very big ones right off the top is vicarious liability. Vicarious liability says that if an agent of yours under an employment agreement does something that gets him in trouble, it flows right through to you as a principal. And the biggest example I can think of is there was an on-site resident manager in the Washington, D.C. area that failed to rent to a family with children, which is a protected class in fair housing familial status. And the owner was found guilty to the tune of $2.41 million. Whereas if instead the owner had leased the property to the person who ran it and then had that person sublease it, well, then realistically, since he would not have been his agent, that liability would not have flown through to him. But anything that a fee manager can do for an owner in terms of expenses or whatever else, you have more flexibility with a master lease. For example, with a master lease, it's not a one size fits all. It's what are the owner's needs? Give the owner everything they need, and what's left, you take everything that's left. Much more flexible. Each transaction is a separate negotiated agreement.
Yeah, so there might be some, capital gains or estate issues. They don't want to either sell outright or they don't want to have somebody manage. And so are these primary drivers for these folks that are looking for, the owners that are looking for master lease arrangements?
Well, I found that when I built up my business, a lot of them were really unintentional landlords. They were folks that were being transferred out of the area and thought they might want to come back. They had too much debt on their property and couldn't sell it in the market today. They weren't people that owned the property for investment, generally speaking. They were people and yet I clearly had investors that own for investment purposes, but a lot of them were one-offs, and you built your business dealing with one-offs, but you could look at each owner and see their specific needs. Versus a management company, when someone calls up finding out what services they offer, the first question they generally ask is, how much do you charge? And if someone would ask me that, I'd say, Well, that depends. Sometimes we don't charge anything at all, and we'll guarantee the rents, whether it's vacant or full, and take on some of the expenses involved with running the property. When can we get together and talk? That is a much better approach to at least getting to know an owner and seeing if you can offer something that can solve his needs. You can't go in there with one map to the gold mine, with one way to do business. That just doesn't make sense. It would be like throwing darts at a dartboard in the dark. You're not going to know if you can meet their needs. But if you go in and fact find and find out, why would you rent this wonderful property? Why wouldn't you just sell it? What are your options? What do you really want to have accomplished? If Santa Claus came tomorrow, what would he look like? And you develop what the owner's needs are. You meet those needs, and again, then you see what's left for you. And many times there's a great opportunity. Now, once you've got control of the property, as long as you underpromise and overperform, who are they going to want to deal with if they want to sell that property down the road? Many times you can have owner financing. Many times you get properties at a very reasonable price because, they have no negotiation. They don't have any downtime. They go from a rental to a sale. It allows you the opportunity to have time to essentially whittle and rock with the owner and gain trust. And let's face it, all properties get sold at some point in time. If you run the properties, and we have some properties we've really run for the better part of 30 years, that creates tremendous relationships with those owners.
So when you look at a property, you really have to know the market because you need to go in with a spread, understand what rents you can get, and allow a sufficient profit margin for you from the master lease that you would negotiate. So I would imagine before you go in, you really do your homework on the market.
You need to know the rental market. There's no doubt about that. But if you're in this business, you will know the rental market. You wouldn't necessarily have to get hurt if you didn't, because you could do a performance lease that says, I'll pay you let's say I'll pay you 95% of what I collect if and when I collect it. If I don't collect any rent, if I don't rent it, I won't give you anything. You're not going to get economically hurt, but you're also not going to be in business very long if you don't know. I mean, our objective really was to net the owners more than they could net on their own. And we felt we really could do that. We are very efficient at what we do. We could buy things wholesale. We had, as you mentioned earlier, we had the networks of people who could solve problems for us. And we could net owners more than they could net themselves.
So I guess, is that kind of a typical lease structure, 95%? Would you say that's common?
No, I wouldn't give you the real numbers.
Oh, okay.
My numbers they're across the board, and they're very different, each one. Again, it's, will I take less margin up front if I've got a longer lease? If I've got a good lease, I'll secure my lease with a deed of trust. And if you're a mortgage state, with a mortgage. I mean, I'll glue the lease to the property, which guarantees that if the owner doesn't do what they say they will do in the lease, I can foreclose them. Now, what are they agreeing that they will do? They're agreeing that they will pay the underlying encumbrances. They will insure the property. They will pay the taxes. They will do those things. If they don't do it, I can foreclose and end up with the property. So, I mean, a lease is, no one sees the value of a lease, but they're very, very valuable assets. You can borrow against them. I have subleased my leases to other entities that further sublease to the occupants. They've done the bookkeeping and dealt with the occupants of the property. And I've dealt with the owners, and I've been the conductor of the bands. They've used my paperwork, done it my way. And anytime I didn't like what was going on, I could pull the darn thing back. So leases are just, they're people don't see them, and they're also very easy to negotiate. Now, most people think that when you want to do a master lease, you want to do a master lease option. And that's fine. You can do that. But from my standpoint, I did not do that very often right up front. Why? Because if you're getting a lease option, the owners perceive you've gotten more than a lease. And they either want to charge you something for the option in terms of consideration, or else they want to charge you inflated rent. And I really didn't choose to do either of those things. I found if I could get in with a good long-term lease and secure that lease with a deed of trust, I really had a stealth option. Because yes, they could sell it, but they could only sell it subject to my lease. They could refinance it, but no one wanted to be, they needed me to subordinate, generally speaking, because people didn't want to record debt below my lease. So you really, leases, I found I did not have to try and negotiate a lease option up front. Now, on the other hand, if I'm dealing with someone who doesn't want to lease the property at all, they want to sell the property, well, gee whiz, in that case, then I'll say, gee, I'll buy it from you, but I can't pay you today. So I'll lease option it today and pay you at some time down the road. And that would be a little different negotiation. But again, I'm looking at the needs of the individual owners in each case and trying to meet them where they are, solve their problem. You know, a typical problem might be that the husband's been moved to Cincinnati and he's left the wife and kids back in Colorado Springs. And the kids are, let's say, 2 or 3 teenage boys. And they know that if they don't get the kids back with the dad pretty quick, they're going to lose the whole family. That's a problem. And if I can solve that problem, they're happy, we're happy, and that usually leads to a very long-term relationship.
So at the core of this, the appeal is that you get to control the property. And I know you said that every master lease is different, but I would imagine that the term of the lease is very important. How do you approach the term, and what terms do you look for?
Well, again, I don't think I had very many that were the same. If I had a performance lease, they typically ran to year. My feeling was that if the owners didn't like me or I didn't like them, we both ought to be able to cancel. But if I had some kind of a fixed lease or some kind of a hybrid lease that I thought had real value, then first of all, I wouldn't take anything on without at least a meeting of the minds that we were probably going to do it for at least 3 years minimum, performance lease or not. Why? Because it takes a little while to kick the tires, shake down the property, and get it right and get the right people in there. But if I'm doing a fixed lease, I really want a minimum of probably 6 years. Now, what's the magic for that? Well, I'm really thinking in many cases these properties were owner occupied, and so if they left the town and thought that they wanted to come back, I really wanted to tie it up for longer than needed for Section 121, which said they had to live in the property 2 out of 5 years. And so then if they wanted to sell it, because Section 121 says that if you have a big gain in your property, an individual can claim $250,000 worth of gain. Am I saying that right? It's funny. I'm just having a senior moment. Whether it's 150 and 300, I think it's 250 and 500 worth of capital gain. You just don't have to pay any tax on it. So clearly, there would be a reason if they decided they wanted to sell it to come back to me and negotiate off my lease, or I might buy the property. But so typically, I'm at least thinking of doing 3 years. If I'm doing a fixed lease, I'd really like 6 years or more. And generally, I'll ask owners. I'll say, I'll start out and say, when we're discussing their needs, after I spend a lot of time on them, before I even talk about what we can do and how we can do it, it's would you like to take the risk and you'll get the reward, or do you want me to take the risk and I'll get the reward? Well, what's the difference? If they take the risk and they get the reward, that's a performance lease. They get a percentage of whatever we get in on rent. And they pay their various expenses as an owner on the property. If they want me to take the risk, then I will be doing some kind of a fixed or a hybrid lease. And if I'm taking the risk, we'll start at, what is market rent? And then I'll really ask them to come up with the price as much as me feeding it to them. I'll say, well, I'm not nonprofit. I don't do this, for my health. How much would you think you would have to pay someone to manage the property? And they'll come up with a number. And then I'll say, okay, and how much should we take off for vacancy? And again, another number. And how much for maintenance? And they'll start to slow down on their numbers at some point. And then I'll say, okay, and I'm eligible for one more category. And that other category is profit, because I'm willing to do something that no one else is willing to do. I'm willing to take on this risk of running your property. And so a fixed lease can really, it can be very profitable. When you're asking specifics, they're all totally different, but I'll give you one. I asked some folks if they wanted me to lease their property for $9.95 for 4 years, or $9.95 for 3 years and $10.95 for 3 more years. They accepted the second option, which meant I should have asked for a longer term, but I immediately subleased the property for $12.95 on day one. So that was a pretty good return. And, most investors, when they get started in this business, the first problem is they don't have any capital. They don't have $2 million sitting in the bank to go out and buy good houses. So they have to take on the houses they can afford to buy, which, if they're like I was when I started, they were not the cream of the crop houses that appealed to the best tenants. Whereas Master Leasing, I can go after the low-hanging fruit, the good stuff. I can farm the area where, I really can deal with the kinds of tenants that have the right credit scores, that can do what they say they're going to do. And so they're just a whole bunch of benefits.
So are you doing yellow letters or postcards, or how are you finding your deals?
I'm not doing any of that. First of all, there was a point in my life where I wanted to trade my time for more money. But I'm 68 years old, and I now want to trade my money for more time. So I'm lazy, and I'm 8 months in Naples, Florida, 4 months in Colorado Springs. Our properties are in Colorado Springs, and I'm really not building up my portfolio anymore. I've got a nice lifestyle, and I've got a wonderful family. Now we are building up master leases, or we are helping the next generation come around. One of my middle daughter and her husband support themselves doing master leasing, and they have a nice portfolio, and they own quite a few, and they have options on some. But even when I was doing it, most of my business came from word of mouth. People came to me and they assumed they were going to hire me to manage their property. And after I got done developing what their situation was and what their problem was, and that management was the right solution for them, then I would generally tell them they couldn't hire me. I wasn't for sale, but we might be able to do business. And I would tell them how that might take place. And generally speaking, it was a very, very easy negotiation.
And do some of your leases, are they structured similarly to like a commercial triple net deal where you tell them, look, the property taxes I'll take on, the insurance I'll take on, and you don't worry about those things, and I'll pay you a net on the back end of that? Is there anything structured like that?
No, not entirely. I always had a stop loss. I always had a bailout, even on my 35-year lease. My initial bailout was after 36 months with 60 days advance notice with 1 month additional payment as a lease cancellation fee. I was out of there. And the owner could also get out with 3 years, but it was 3 years at the back end of the 35-year lease. So after 32 years, they could get out. No, everything is I never put myself at risk for 100% of all the expenses. I would put myself at risk for so much a month and a maximum per year. But all of those things are negotiable. Now, I will tell you that, like on that 35-year leasehold interest that I had, initially I lost money the first couple of years. Why? Because I put in the yard, I put in new carpet, I painted the outside and the inside of the house, and I got it set and ready to go. But I had a fixed lease for 35 years. And so I could afford to do that. And I had a very good cash flow once those things were done. So, key thing I need your listeners to know is you can't do cookie cutters. You got to look at the needs of the individuals. You got to whittle and rock. You got to talk to people. You got to get to know them. You got to listen more than you talk and find out about them, their situation, their problem. And then you can offer some solutions. And you can't offer one solution because my perceived best solution to people's problem is not their perceived best solution to the problem. So, for example, Master Leasing is not the only thing in my real estate toolbox. I can buy the property, I can lend against the property, I can lease the property, but I will tell you that Master Leasing was the most effective way I know to negotiate and get that first bite out of the property.
And when you look at Master Leasing, is there any rule of thumb that you use in terms of the range for a margin that you'll work under?
No, it really isn't. It's back to what the needs of the owner is. I would take a negative cash flow perhaps on some, if the terms are right for me long term. I mean, has anyone had a negative cash flow on their investment property that they buy? You think about this for a second. Everyone's hung up on the fact that you don't own the property. Well, sometimes I'll stand in front of a group and I'll say, how many people own real estate? And all these hands go up. And I'll say, well, keep your hands up for a second. How many of you really own the property or you've got it on layaway? You're buying it over time. You got a mortgage on it. Well, a good part of the hands go down. And then I say, okay, now, so you own it. No one can ever take it away from you. It's yours, right? And they'll say, yeah. And I'll say, well, explain this to me. How, when I was in the property tax business, did I get title to a single family house just for paying someone else's property taxes? You never really own it. If you don't pay your property tax on it, someone's going to take it away from you. It's an ego thing that you want to have your name on the building. Rockefeller said, control everything, own nothing. Think about this. A lot of landlords have bullseyes on the back of their back as they're walking around. As they accrue assets, they're all in the public records and people can see that. What is my exposure as having a lease on a property? Not much. If I secure my lease with a deed of trust or a mortgage, it really just looks like I'm a lender. Again, very low profile. And yet I can gain a lot of the benefits of ownership just by leasing it.
And maintenance and repairs and things, it sounds like the longer the lease that you have tied up, the more willing you are to do some of those repairs. Is that generally the way you see those, that type of scenario? Carpet, paint, maybe the fireplace needs repairing, this sort of thing. Roof.
Yeah, I mean, typically I will limit myself to, the first $75 a month or some number and a maximum per year. But will I negotiate something different on a one-off, on an individual situation based on owner's needs? Of course I will, if the economics make sense. And that's one of the beautiful things about this, in that I have the flexibility to look at the overall on the whole thing. People are getting started in the real estate business. I dare say, or at least when I got started, you have no cash flow. My wife used to say it was like Sisyphus rolling this great big boulder up a hill. You just wanted to survive and keep it going up. And it took years until you got to the top, and then it was a plateau and it would roll a little better until you got all the debt paid off, and then it started to roll down the other side and your income level started to increase pretty dramatically. Well, if you think about that, I dare say most folks' operating expenses are somewhere between a minimum of 30 to 40% on single family houses. Then they add debt service on top of that. There is no cash flow for them up front. And yet what most people want in this business when they get started is they want the cash flow. I get cash flow from day one with a master lease. It gives me the opportunity to build up rapport with the owners, gain trust, do a good job, and I get to test drive the property to see if I even have any interest in it before I buy it.
And talking of buying, one of the benefits is that when you have the deeds of trust is that you have the ability to foreclose if the owner doesn't do what they're supposed to do. Have you gone through that process?
Never had to. I'm dealing with good owners. I do find you got to screen your owners as well as you screen your tenants. You got to make sure that credit's important to them, that they do what they say they'll do. Because many times I've leased from owners that have a significant negative cash flow. And so I want to make sure they'll make those payments.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that was the case here in Florida in 2008, 2009, 2010. You know, it was folks struggling to make the nut, and a lot of overextension on the value and versus mortgage versus value. What are some of the hot points, David, that, if people are getting into this? That's question number one. And then question number two would be, I know you're not marketing now, but at some point, you had to get information out there so that people knew what you were doing. There's a chicken and the egg scenario there. Obviously, once you build up your clientele, that you're getting people through word of mouth, but didn't always start that way. So can you cover that a little bit? Like when you got started, how you got people to know what you were doing?
Sure. The first thing I would say is you don't have to quit your day job. So keep your income coming in wherever it is now, and just put your big toe in the water and try this one time and see how much it hurts. And if it doesn't hurt, then you'll try doing it again. And so you can build up the income very slowly initially. You don't have to, quit everything and go full time. I'll give you some of the examples of things that I know people have done, because I did it all. I mean, one of the things I did do was real estate brokerage outfits have to give training to their sales organizations. And I had organizations that would bring me in to teach about property management. And I would attempt to essentially feed them with a fire hose, which meant I'd tell them everything I could possibly tell them in a short period of time, which really scared them to death and made them never want to get in the real estate business, in the property management business. And so then they would refer business to me because I wouldn't take any of their sales down the road. And they could, instead of failing with owners, they could go to owners that they couldn't sell for at that time and say, I have a solution for you. I've got this guy you ought to talk to. And whether I was acting as a fee manager, as I was in 1981, or whether I was acting as a principal after 1996, I could do business with them. So that helped for me. I had a David Pond in Fort Collins. He went to a title company and had them give him a list of owners whose property taxes were sent to a different location for an area town he liked. And he farmed that area. And he went by each house, took a picture of the house, turned it into a postcard, and sent a postcard out that said, I guess you didn't know what was going on. If I can help, let me know. He built up a tremendous business very quickly. There's just anything that a fee manager could do to build up their business. You, as an entrepreneur, you cannot hold yourself out as a property manager, but you can hold yourself out as a professional landlord. So, you can do yellow letters. I've never done letters. I think the postage is pretty prohibitive at this point. I think Bill Cook's approach of walking a neighborhood and knocking on doors, I just don't know anything more effective than that anywhere, whether it's buying properties, leasing properties, whatever.
And David, you did all of this in residential properties. Did you ever try it on any commercial properties?
I did. I had a little commercial office building. The first year and a half I was in the business, I went through all 5 CCIM classes, the Certified Commercial Investment Member. So I understand internal rates of returns and financial management rates of return. But the single family house is really what I focus on. And the thing about the single family house, which is so wonderful, is it's the only piece of real estate that I know that comes complete with an on-site resident manager who's called tenant. If you hire the right guy and you share expectations with that guy, he can take care of both the inside of the property and the outside of the property. Meaning, I like the property that the tenant can walk outside the front door, walk all the way around the property and say, get off my property. Now, when I had commercial or multifamily, I found my operating expenses were at least 10% higher. Why? I had to provide services. I had to plow parking lots. I had to get lawns cut. I had to maintain stuff. And that was a drag. I really think the management is really the lazy man's way to deal with the real estate industry. People don't realize that. They think that tenants and toilets, they really think real estate's great if you just didn't have to deal with tenants. From my standpoint, I don't think my properties are my biggest assets. I think my tenants are my biggest assets. If you've read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, you know that assets pay you and liabilities eat you. Well, vacant properties don't feed you. They eat you. And so it's the tenants that feed you. And so, tenant screening, finding the right folks, sharing expectations, putting them in there, and then retaining them long term. Boy, that is the key to this business. And if you know how to do that and you know how to provide the customer service that's needed, I deal with some of the greatest people you'd ever want to meet.
How about potholes? Like, can you give us one or two that, you got started and you go, wow, I didn't know that. I won't make that mistake again.
I'm thinking, I can think of problems I've had. I can think of a problem I had recently, but that's not the question you're asking me. Let me think. Potholes. Okay, I'll give you one. The toughest part of master leasing is not the tenants. It's the owners, because they think they own the property and they want to call you up and tell you what they think you ought to be doing with it. They don't understand that they've got my time and my expertise, and they got to let me run with it. Only one person can run the property, either me or them. We both can't. So I had to fire some owners because they just were too involved, or they wanted to tell me how to run my business. And I think they've got to understand that who they're hiring and what they're hiring them for, and then give them free rein. I think the sooner you can get rid of bad owners, the better off you are. You'll save a lot of energy, and you have more time to find more properties.
So, David, this was all fascinating. If our listeners want to reach you, can you tell them how they could contact you?
Yeah, I think the easiest way is through our website. It's just my name. If they've got my name, it's davidtilney.com. And Tilney is spelled T as in Thomas, I-L-N as in Nancy, E-Y.com. They can email me from there. My cell phone number is on there. I don't hide from people. I really enjoy this business. I think, management is just, property management is just, it's just, I don't know what else I'm not qualified to do anything else, quite honestly, but it's been a wonderful business over the years.
Now, you're doing some teaching too, aren't you?
For 28 years, we have taught two courses. Well, one course we didn't teach for the first few years, but I teach a 2-day hassle-free property management class and a 1-day master leasing class. We only teach it once or twice a year. We are teaching it the end of April. We have the Upstate Carolina RIA that's bringing us in, and it's the last long weekend in April. I can't quite tell you I may be able to look, but the date, it's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday in April, last weekend.
Terrific. And we'll make sure that information is on our website so that people can find you if they want to attend the class. They've got information on that too.
And we have a click through on our website also, so they can find it that way also.
So, David, I just must add, I didn't realize that Eric and I were doing master leasing, because we have our office suites, and we've got these suites of offices, and we took on extra space which we lease out, and so we have other tenants coming in, or we have people coming in, and so I like it now that I can say I'm a master leaser, a master lessor.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. Now you just need to do it with other product, whether it's commercial or residential or whatever else. I think you could do it with dental offices. You get a young dentist who just graduated and he's got lots of debt, but he needs an office. If you got the capital to put together the office, I think you could lease the whole operation to him and take a percentage of his income. I think it's unlimited what you can do with leases if you just set your mind to it.
Awesome. Hey, David, really appreciate the time that you spent with us today. Anything else before we let you go?
I don't think so. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you both.
Thank you, sir.
Stephen and Eric.
Thanks, David.
And that was David Tilney. Stephen, fascinating stuff. we run executive suites, shared office space, whatever you want to call it here. And so we're doing some form of subleasing, master tenancy actually, for on the commercial side. And it's worked out pretty well.
And we
for us.
thought we didn't know what we were doing.
We don't know what we're doing. We're just sort of stumbling through, but it is an opportunity for us to, use our property, investment property, or our office property as one of our investment properties. So it was interesting to hear David talk about it on the residential side and hear how he's dealing a little bit differently than how we deal with things. What were your thoughts about our discussion with David today, Stephen?
Well, he made one key statement, and the reason that this all works is he says the key is you must control the property. If he doesn't try to make a killing at the first, like we always talk about, you have to buy it at the lowest price, you have to lease it at the lowest price. He gets in to control the property and then lets it evolve as he builds his relationship.
Yeah, and I mean, you certainly can see the opportunity there for folks who maybe, for whatever reason, don't want to sell yet. Maybe they're, $10,000, $15,000 upside down on the house, or the closing costs are going to eat them alive. It doesn't really make it a lot of sense, and they're content renting for a while and paying down some more of their equity. That this could be a great situation, but at the same time that folks don't want to deal with a tenant who's, they might not be seeing the rent from this month or the next month. But, obviously David can show that he's got the capacity to execute, and it gives people some comfort that they can walk away from the home and still make a revenue stream off of it and get their expenses covered and pay down some of their equity. So you can see the benefit from the owner of why they would want to do this and why they would want to invest in this type of a structure. So David was a great guest. Stephen, where else can people hear other great guests that we have on the show?
The one place to go is www.investfloridashow.com, where you will have access to our archives and also download the mobile app so you can listen while you're mobile or in the gym.
Guys, as always, we appreciate the time that you invest with us each and every episode. And until next time, hasta la vista.
You've just listened to the Invest Florida podcast with Eric Odom and Stephen Silverman. Join us every week for actionable real estate investment ideas, and of course, visit our website at www.investfloridashow.com for more shows and tips on how to earn a cash flow in the real estate market in Florida. While hosts and producers of the Invest Florida show have no reason to doubt the validity of comments of our guests, we do not warranty their accuracy. Please check with your legal, financial, and tax advisors before entering into any investment. Returns will vary from person to person and deal to deal based on unique circumstances. All information expressed in this show is for educational purposes only. Opinions of the guests are not necessarily shared by the hosts and producers of the Invest Florida show.